Hello everybody and welcome to this week's Motor Trade Radio podcast, brought to you in association with eBay Motors Group. It is Saturday the 17th of April and you're joined by myself, Philip Nothard.
And me, Curtis Hutchinson. This is episode 20, season 7 of Motor Trade Radio, bringing you all the chatter that matters. And once again, we've gathered together this week's big industry stories across the franchised and independent sectors for you to enjoy all in one place on your podcast feed.
So, I mean, this is now the end of the sort of the first week of dealerships reopening physically, and we must say that this is from a physical perspective now in England, Wales and Northern Ireland, after the obviously initial one with Scotland opening on the 5th of April. But all accounts, it's busy at some places out there, isn't it? And seems to be the talk of the industry at the minute.
Yeah, the advanced word certainly on social media is that dealers have had a busy start, and there's been some great posts by some of the groups. I mean, notably Marshall's, that they've really taken to social media and promoting the fact that they're open and indeed seeing customers.
And I mean, the key with this is, because I mean, we have got the interview, and for anyone that hasn't listened to it, a fascinating interview with Robin and Sam Luscombe from Luscombe Motors in Leeds there, and getting both father and son on, both from the, I hate to say it, but one of the original, car boys with Robin Luscombe there, and the new generation with Sam, who's their innovation manager, looking at obviously all the digital proposition. But what is interesting with that, and talking about the showrooms reopening, Curtis, is because they represent three brands with Suzuki, Mitsubishi and MG, so one being a long-serving brand with Suzuki, with a certain demographic of customer, Mitsubishi, which is a brand exiting the UK from a vehicle sales perspective, and with MG, which is kind of the new entrance with electric vehicles. It's different performance since the showrooms are reopening for each of those brands, isn't it?
Yeah, it was a fascinating interview because the experiences across those three brands was very, very different throughout the lockdown period. And it's a wide-ranging interview. So we spoke to both of them just 24 hours after they reopened their showroom. And they cover a lot of ground because they're talking about the experience over the lockdowns, the experience to the build up to the reopening, but also they go on to talk about EV demand, which has really picked up for them with the MG brand, and also their thoughts over the course of Q2. So a lot to pack into that interview, and that is available. It's on your podcast feed, so do urge you to head over there. But we will have an extract from that on today's show as well.
Yeah, and it is interesting though, because what it does highlight. I mean, we're talking there about showrooms busy, but they're not all as busy as of each other, are they? There's some that are busier than others, some that have been better throughout lockdown than others have been. So it's very much brand specific and business specific, from one in performance throughout the lockdown period, and secondly from the recovery perspective. So well worth a listen, puts things in context.
Yeah, and interestingly, we could hear how busy they were because you could hear voices in the background of staff talking to customers, probably like you can hear my dog barking in the background.
We weren't going to say that's the life we live these days, Curtis.
Yeah,
so we've got some cracking headlines this week, haven't we? We've picked a few. We're conscious that we've got a midway interview there in terms of a sort of a snippet from it part way through, but we've tried grabbing some very interesting headlines this week.
Yeah, so headlines this week come from Car Dealer, Motor Trader, AM Online, Motor Trade News, Fleet News and Automotive News Europe. So the stories that we will be looking at, we have Cox Automotive on how pent-up demand could result in a sizable Q2 market. how online could reduce sales transaction times by 75%. We have another digital used car retailer entering the market, Driverama. They're preparing to launch across Europe. We've got an update on SsangYong because as we record this, we've just learnt that it's going into receivership in South Korea. Gumtree Motors are launching Information Hub, or in fact, they have launched it for used car buyers returning to the market. An update from Hyundai on their EV plans at the moment, which will see them collaborating very closely with Uber. And finally, this week, a welcome return from an industry stalwart.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, the first story is kind of connected to what we were just talking about earlier in terms of that showroom recovery, return to physical showrooms now from the 5th and the 12th of April across the UK. But, you know, we've pulled it, and we mentioned it on last week's show, the digital magazine that I've been working on, that's a quarter of the magazine, Auto Focus, and Car Dealer have pulled extracts from that report and looking at the Q2 recovery on new cars and looking at the potential scenario of what we looked at in terms of, you know, the performance in the second quarter of the year as the showrooms reopening, how they look in terms of compared to previous years, the average that you would expect for a second quarter of the year, and some of the impacts of supply and demand within that quarter.
And this is based on a survey that you did with, it's around 250 dealers, and it found that 42% or 2/5 are expecting new car registrations to increase in 2021. And they are expecting the next few months to be very busy.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of this. I mean, we've got to put it in context that the increase is based on 2020 performance, which you would hope that 2021, with a softer lockdown in the first quarter of the year, and you would hope that we stay out of lockdown now for the remainder of 2021, that we would see some kind of increased recovery from what we finished on last year, and how that looks in terms of that, you know, compared to previous years. So again, you know, a potential best case scenario, and this is obviously that supply gets back to the new car market. You know, there's plenty of product coming into the new car market, that showrooms remain open, and the impact of the COVID on unemployment isn't too severe, and that people do return to the market to buy cars. Then, you know, we forecast a 2.05 million new car registrations for the year, which would be a slight downgrade of what we forecast last year. But more significantly, looking at that second quarter as we've come out of that first quarter and what we expect, and you know, for me, looking at the mid case scenario, which I believe is the most likely scenario, that we would see a result in the second quarter of 520,000 new car registrations, which would be down compared to the normal average from a second quarter of the year. And if you look at the period 2000 to 2019, it would be a downward of 5.9%. But we've got to realise that there is some increase in unemployment, there is potentially some increase in debt. We're not quite sure at this point of how the consumers are going to react when they do get back to normality, whether the holidays, being you were talking, weren't we, whether holidays will be the focus, or whether cars will be the focus, and secondly, if the cars are going to be available. So there's a lot to look at there, but I think, you know, the fact that we'll see some recovery is a positive.
Yeah, because also playing into that is this whole scenario of customers having excess savings, of unplanned savings, as I've seen them described elsewhere. And yeah, they will filter into car sales, because if holidays are problematic again this year, then there is that potential budget there that can be spent on a new car or indeed a used car.
Definitely. And moving on to the next story, which we're heading over to motortrader.com, and this is some analysis and report from with G-Forces there, and they've looked at the online sales could save UK auto retail 9.5 billion each year, and that's a significant figure. But
it's a big one, isn't it?
It's a big number. It's a big number. Yeah, it's a big saving, and I'd question why nobody's spotted that before. But it is based on analysis, and this is looking at the move towards that online retail and where the savings and increased profitability could be.
Yeah, and it's looking at both franchised and independent car dealers, and specifically things like reducing the time it actually takes to transact a vehicle, which I found particularly interesting because they're claiming a saving of 75%. Online versus offline, and also goes on to suggest that dealers could also cut the costs incurred in the process by 45%. And as you say, the analysis suggests a saving of 9.5 billion pounds each year. Now we've had a look at these figures, and I'm not quite sure how they pan out, because the cost of sale saving per vehicle is reduced from 314 to 243 pounds per unit, according to the analysis here, which is a saving of 71 pound per vehicle. But they've taken that figure and worked it out across 6.75 million used car sales, and come up with that figure.
I mean, in fairness, it might be worth trying to get Tim Smith on, who we know, who's the Chief Commercial Officer for GeForce, and talk us through some of the analysis and what they've been up to. But they're talking about, obviously, GeForce has said that by moving to a 30% online sales strategy, that a 50% pure transaction time saving, PTTS, can be achieved alongside a 23% cost of sale saving, CSS, down from 214 to 340, from 314 to 243 per unit. So a lot of acronyms there, but anyway, we'll far too many for me to get out at this time of the day. But I think there is something in this, and again, apologies, but referring to the conversation that we had with Robin and Sam Luscombe, this move towards online, doing what the customers want and the way they want to transact, is clearly a learning that the pandemic has accelerated, and by the sounds of it, many will be adopting. So maybe for the market, some of this analysis will bear out that they will start to see the savings and the increased profitability from the online environment.
Yeah, and an important point made in the interview was that although Luscombe's had put an online platform in place very early during the lockdown period, they were still transacting with customers remotely, whether it was by phone, email, WhatsApp, it's whatever the customer wanted to do. So it was more omni-channel than pure digital.
Definitely. And moving over to the next story, which is in Car Dealer, and this one's an interesting one because it's certainly the topic of the moment, and this is Driver Armour takes swipe at Cazoo by becoming first to offer borderless used car sales across Europe, and this is based on the Cazoo have got intentions moving into Germany, but obviously Driver Armour, who are a business over in Europe, a Prague-based car retailer, aims to become the biggest pan-European online used car retailer by 2025.
Yeah, now all of a sudden this market is looking very, very busy, isn't it? And this story, I actually first saw it in Bloomberg because they reported that the Driver Armour launch is actually being brought forward by 6 months to capitalize on this boom in online car sales. And as you say, they'll be operating across European borders and starting in Germany. So they'll launch in Germany, which is the biggest car market in Europe, and branch out from there. So yeah, this is going to be fascinating to watch.
Yeah, I mean, this whole pan-European situation is accelerating now. I think those businesses that have seen the opportunity, seen the growth plans across Europe, seen the benefits of that borderless movement of vehicles across the European market, you can see where this is coming. I mean, you could see why Cazoo, identified that as a growth opportunity for them.
Yes.
And you can certainly see why these guys, Driver Armour, are saying that they're going to push hard, already being based over there, and going to sort of push hard with this with their growth plan. So it's going to be one interesting one to watch from afar, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And one of the scenarios quoted in the story is that a buyer in, say, Amsterdam could buy a car from Germany and have it delivered to them within 14 days with a money back guarantee as well.
Yeah, and they do add that that they've served 2.5 million customers, and that does give them an advantage of the understanding of the scalable automotive practices, and that they're confident of the experience and the insight that they will ultimately enable them to achieve their market dominance across Europe. So obviously using their experience of that European market and the customers that they've had learnings from.
You're listening to All the Chatter That Matters on Motor Trade Radio, brought to you in association with eBay Motors Group. This is your weekly one-stop shop for all the biggest car retailing headlines, and available by subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you find your favourite podcasts. And also, if you'd like to come on the show or have any news stories or press releases you'd like us to cover next week, then drop us an email at motortraderadio@yahoo.com. Now, next up is the extract we've been talking about from our interview recorded earlier this week with Robin and Sam Luscombe of the Leeds-based Luscombe Motors, the Suzuki, MG and Mitsubishi dealer. And as we mentioned, we spoke to them just 24 hours after they reopened their showrooms, and this is what they had to say. Now, from what you've both said, you've obviously been talking to your customers throughout this latest lockdown and indeed previous ones. And as you said, Robin, you've been seeing customers come in for after sales work. I guess what I'm interested in is what sort of feedback you're getting on the sort of level of pent-up demand. Were you seeing that in the run-up to Monday and in the conversations you were having on the day itself? So what sort of level of pent-up demand are you seeing at the moment for new and used cars?
Well, yesterday we sold half of what we sell in a good week in a day. So that was a good start.
Yeah.
But it's very brand specific. And it's very strange. It surprised us how brand and car specific it is, because MG electric cars have been selling well through lockdown with nobody test driving them. People just happy to buy them based on the fact that it was an electric car. They've done all the research. They want an electric car. That's an affordable electric car. Ticks the box. I want one. I'll have one. Which you would never expect with an electric car. You'd think people would want to test drive it. But they've been unaffected, or seemingly unaffected, by not being able to test drive. Whereas the Suzuki owner, which is generally a retail person that wants a good value, reliable car, the existing Suzuki owners have generally said, I'll just wait. There's nothing wrong with my car. It's a reliable car. It doesn't go wrong. I want a new one, but I'm not in a rush because there's nothing wrong with this one. I'll just wait until everything opens again. And yesterday, predominantly what we sold were Suzukis. We sold as many new Suzukis yesterday as we sold in the whole of January. So it's strange. Mitsubishi is a different animal altogether because of everything that's happening with Mitsubishi. And their pickups, if somebody wants to pick up, they want to pick up. They don't need to drive it. They just want to pick up. Some of the other Mitsubishi product is selling on the fact that there's some good deals, because obviously Mitsubishi UK pulling out. They've got to get rid of the stock. It's not a fire sale by any stretch of the imagination, and the rate we're going, it ain't going to be one. But there are some better deals, and the cars are now selling. And people are buying them, and have been buying them all the way through lockdown.
Again, great interview there. Just to clip it of obviously what we were talking about. It is a long interview, I say, for the podcast, in terms of, I think, probably 45 minutes end to end, but it's great. Everything from what's happening with each of the brands that they represent, as we said at the start of the show, talking about EV and some of the learnings around EV and how they've had to adapt to selling EV vehicles, and around the sort of the learnings around that digital proposition, and how they're adapting with that digital proposition through, with Sam taking the role as that digital manager, that innovation technology manager role, in terms of for driving that through the Luscombe business. So fascinating and great to have those guys on the show.
Yeah, and you know what I found particularly interesting was that we'd set up the interviews that we could talk about the reopening, which they were more than happy to do, but they're already thinking about the next thing and the one beyond that. And they're not just thinking about the reopening. They've got plans in place over the coming weeks, months, and no doubt years.
I sensed Robin's plans were sat by a riverside fly fishing with a beer in his hand, but I'm not sure how soon that will come. But you need to listen to the full interview to understand what I'm referencing there. But we'll move over to the next story. And this is unwelcome news to a certain extent, but there's still time yet for things to change. And heading over to Auto News Europe, and this is, as you said at the start of the show, with SsangYong in receivership as owner Mahindra fails to find buyer. And we have talked about this previously on the podcast, of what was happening with SsangYong trying to find an alternative buyer for scale of their vehicles in the market. But it looks like they've hit a bit of a wall with this one.
Yeah, definitely a bump in the road here. And this story only broke towards the end of the week, so this is pretty new. And it looks as though what's happened is that SsangYong have gone into court receivership, and it sounds like some form of Chapter 11 style arrangement, which will give SsangYong in South Korea time to put together some form of rehabilitation plan. But just to recap, Mahindra & Mahindra, they own 75% of the business, and which they acquired back in 2010. And some listeners will recall that they bought SsangYong at a time when they were near bankruptcy anyway, but they have struggled to turn the business around, despite some rollout of new products, sharing platforms, and we don't know at this early stage how this will affect UK operations, but it's clearly unwelcome news.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it is a fairly short statement. It's more of an update as to what's happening. And as you say, it sounds more like a Chapter 11 to a certain extent, but certainly with everything that's happening within the OEM world and some of the mergers and acquisitions that are taking place across some of the manufacturers there, it'll be interesting to see what does come from this at the end of it. It'll be a shame, because I think certainly SsangYong is an emerging brand. I think some of the product that they have at the minute is being well received, particularly in the UK. It's a very good price point product in the UK, and they've certainly done some great work recently with some of their products in terms, with the market. So again, it would be a shame if something does happen, that we do lose them, and following the Mitsubishi exit from the UK market. So one that we'll try and keep a close eye on and keep you up to date as we hear anything.
Yep, and over to Motor Trade News for the next story, and the headline there is Gumtree Motors launches Info Hub to assist used car buyers. Now, this is quite an interesting one, because it's actually showing the perspective of the used car buyer, who has also been out of the market for a long time because of the various lockdowns. So what Gumtree Motors, the team there, have done is they've created a content hub to help consumers through each step of the car purchasing process. So this means that there's more information on models, specs, trims, prices, and also vehicles on sale near them. And it includes things like expert advice reviews and buying tips. So if these buyers have been out of the market for some time, this is to ease them back in gently.
And there's a comment in there from Derma, and he goes on that the research shows that the average car buyer takes 41 days to learn as much as possible about a potential purchase and find the right car for them. And it's to help, as you say there, Curtis, that is to help them through that painless as possible, just to make it easy for them. I mean, 41 days seems a very short period of time for the kind of research I sometimes do to buy a new phone or something. I think by the time I've researched a telly, it's out of date and there's a new one on the market. I have to start all over again. But
yeah, you know what, Phil? I've actually discovered if ever I want to buy anything, I'll ask you if you've already got it, because I know that you've done the research.
I've done that. I do tend to do a little bit of research. Yeah, at work I'm quite decisive on what I do. When it comes to personal acquisitions, I tend to put a little bit of time into researching things.
You like to agonise, don't you?
Just a little bit, yeah. And then I have regret purchasing or whatever. What is it called? That's once I've bought it, I think, did I do the right thing there? Did I buy it? Is there a better one that I should have bought? But yeah, we'll move on.
Yeah, but no one could accuse you of buying in haste, could they?
Definitely not. So if you ever need to buy anything, let me know, and I might have already got all the research, and I'll just tell you which one to buy. But I think this is great. I think you made the point earlier. There's a lot of focus on new cars, and then used cars. It's down to the dealer to create the advert, create the support and advice for the customers. But actually, where Gumtree Motors are trying to intervene is to say, do you know what, you can come to us, we've got access to all the information that you need, and we'll try and help you through that purchase and help you make the right decision. So I think it's a great initiative from these guys to be able to do that for customers and focusing on that used car customer, because we know to a certain extent that used cars is going to paramount for many of the dealers this year.
And over to Fleet News for the next story. The headline there is Hyundai to provide discounted EVs to Uber drivers. So this is an interesting story. It's a European-wide deal between Hyundai and Uber, which will see Uber being offered Kona and Ioniq models.
Yeah, I mean, you can see, a very strategic move there. If you look at the volume of Uber vehicles, the challenge that they face in obviously trying to get their drivers into electric vehicles so they can operate within city centres, not just in the UK, but as the story says, across Europe there. We know that Uber are putting a lot of investment, particularly in London, in the UK, for that curbside and home charging infrastructure for their drivers. And we were talking just before we started to record that one of the biggest issues that Uber face is the majority of their drivers live outside of London, and they may live in tenancies and things like that, or they don't have any off-street parking, and they rely on public charging to charge their vehicle to do the job that they do for Uber. And sometimes they have to get in towards London before they can charge the vehicle to do the work that they need to do for that day. So there's a lot of focus, and it's a great initiative for Hyundai to be teaming up with Uber, because in terms of acceleration of Hyundai products into the EV sector, what better way to do it than a sector of the market that will become wholly reliant on electric vehicles.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, because a lot of Uber drivers, certainly in my experience, operate hybrids at the moment, and they work well for them because they don't have that problem of recharging. But they will need to transition, and Uber's strategic plans are to reach 50% of EV miles by 2025 and to actually hit zero emissions by 2030. So that process has started. It's underway, and certainly this collaboration with Hyundai will help. And interestingly, I don't know when they're rolling this out, but fairly soon Uber customers will be able to choose whether they want to ride in a zero emission vehicle rather than an ICE vehicle.
Yeah, yeah, you can see that, can't you? Because
Yeah,
it is, you know, there will be people that want to continue support that zero emission, and they won't want some dirty diesel coming picking them up if they've spent, you know, if they're the majority of their life they're trying to focus on reducing the green footprint, and you can see that. You know, it's a great, I say, you know, it's a great move, great strategic move by Hyundai and Uber to team up on this, and definitely focusing on the right area. And we've got our final story, and this is over in we picked the story from motortrader.com, and this is the return of our good friend. And we did chat, didn't we, at the time when we ran the story, when David Peel had moved away from PSA and particularly with Peugeot, and he has reappeared. And we always say these guys can't walk away, don't we? And David Peel to join Pentagon Motor Group as MD. So I think these guys have got a great MD there with David.
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, David's a friend of the show. We had him on probably about 18 months ago. He was most recently MD of Peugeot, but he'd been with Group PSA for, well, I think it was almost 20 years as regional director, fleet director, but probably most significantly before he became MD of Peugeot, he was the chief executive of Robbins and Day. So, you know, he knows how to run a dealer group. And I think that really fed into his role as MD of Peugeot. He could empathize with dealers. So it's great to see him back in the motor trade, and it's great to see him back running a dealer group. You know, Pentagon, very well respected, £600 million turnover business, representing 12 brands, including Peugeot, of course. 26 sites across East Midlands, Northwest, South Yorkshire, and Lincolnshire. So this is a really good move for David.
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but you know, you sometimes see the move the other way, you know, out of the dealer world into the manufacturer world, into the OEM world. You know, as David did, as you pointed out, from Robbins and Day into the PSA Peugeot world. But actually, the experience that he now brings back to Pentagon, one, in terms of his dealer experience of Robbins and Day, but also his insight and knowledge now from an OEM perspective. That's a skill set that not many will have with that double-sided now. So we'll be able to look at the Pentagon group and knowledge of that dealer group and what the business needs to do there, but actually, you know what, how to operate with the manufacturer.
Yes, yeah, and the sort of leverage that gives him, that experience. So yeah, there's going to be some fascinating conversations around that.
Where the pressure's coming from the manufacturer and the dealer to do some pre-reg deals.
Yes.
Like, but anyway, yes. So I think that's it for this week. I mean, let's say, conscious that we've got the midway plug there with Robin and Sam Luscombe. Do head over to the full interview, as we've said all the way through. Great timing, perfect timing to understand, you know, what's happening at the coalface as dealerships have reopened for physical sale, and some of them learnings that will remain from the lockdown periods that we've been through. But again, a week of significant headlines following the bank holiday the other week. So again, it's a lot going on at the minute. We just hope that we stay on track for the restriction lifts and everything goes as planned now.
Yeah, absolutely right. That is all for this week. You've been listening to the weekly Motor Trade Radio podcast, brought to you in association with eBay Motors Group. Thanks for joining us for all the chat that matters. And as Phil says, do check out your podcast feed for our interview with Robin and Sam Luscombe, talking about this week's reopening and how it all went. And also look out for last week's interview with Steve Whitten from Men Able, discussing raising awareness of mental health and well-being. So Philip and I are back again next weekend with the week's headlines. Until then, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.